Have you ever wished that you could just electrocute a man by touching him? Just a little electrocution? Today I am reviewing The Power by Naomi Alderman. Welcome to Book Hunt, and if you're new here, my name's Nell. I review books for feminists and women to read. The Power. Naomi Alderman was born in 1974. She's an English woman. She writes speculative fiction. This is probably her most notable, most well-known novel, but she's written a number of them. They do seem to focus around power and gender, although there's some Doctor Who fiction in there as well. This has been made into a TV series and won the Women's Prize for Fiction. The Power is set in a world where all of a sudden the women have the power to control electric current, I guess. Create, maybe? I'm not really sure on the science of that. But they can zap people. Sounds fun. And things. It's not only men that can receive the zapping. They can zap each other. They can zap objects. That's the premise. What's it really about? So it's pretty much a straight flip of power, of what would happen if we handed the power of our current patriarchal society to the women. What would be the events, and what would be the changes, and what would be the conflict? That is the central premise of this story. It's set up around a few characters that we follow as their lives completely are altered by this change in biology. But each of those characters either comes into or moves out of societal power throughout the course of the book. And it's that journey that is the focus of the novel. For me, I thought that this was very interesting, but I'm not sure that it was interesting for me in the ways that the author intended. It's definitely a book about gender, but the failure to include trans people in any real way in the discussion about what would happen to gender roles if there was a change in power and authority that was correlated to biological sex. It just lacked complexity and completely dismissed a large and important portion of our population. I think that there was a small attempt to sort of approach that issue, but it was very much lip service, and I didn't feel like it did it any credit. The other thing is, I think the main point of the author is really that men and women aren't all that different. And while I agree with that, I also think that if you handed women power now, they're not going to instantly forget the last, even just their lifetimes. I feel that if Naomi Alderman had looked at historical changes and handovers of power, this would have been a different book. Because when one group oppresses another and the oppressed group takes power, I don't think it happens the way that it's laid out in this book. And I found that to be, in some ways, unbelievable. What I did find interesting was the discussion of power as a result of violence or threatened violence, and the acknowledgement that that's what our current civilization is built upon, that law and order is kept by police who have weapons and who have the authority and ability to physically restrain and hurt you if necessary in order to keep the peace. And that if you break the law, the punishment is a physical violence and a threat that if you don't obey and then walk into this cell we've decided you're going to, we will make you. It is all predicated on this ability to be violent. And I guess that's where historically the suggestion of women being subservient comes from, is that the idea that we cannot be violent. And number one, I don't think that's true. I think that women can be very violent and strong and physical and all of those things. But I do think that the question of whether we can change our society in any fundamental way, move towards a society that runs in a compassionate and inclusive way when the authority of our governments and of our lawmakers and our law enforcers is predicated on violence. How do we proceed to be a more enlightened and compassionate society when ultimately whoever can pick up the biggest gun wins? And that sort of left me pondering, and I found that to be the most interesting conversation in The Power. Despite the gender focus, it was actually not gender that I ended up focusing on. If you liked The Handmaid's Tale or The Hunger Games, then you'll probably enjoy this book. It's a good dystopian. It was an enjoyable read. The action is considerably entertaining and the characters are fleshed out enough to be enjoyable. It's not a character portrait by any stretch of the imagination, but the characters were, 3D actual humans and mostly women. So for me, that's a lot of boxes checked and ultimately quite a good book. I'm just not sure that I enjoyed the bits that it's marketed on. Thanks. Love you. Bye.